How can I help people escape extreme poverty? How can I help people get the health care they need? How can I help everyone live freely and with dignity? How can I help reverse climate change? These are just some of the challenges our clients, like you, want to solve. So do we. By 2025, we aim to mobilize $1 billion through our philanthropy platforms into high-impact initiatives, reach 25 million people, and provide 1 million people with employment and entrepreneurship support. But one thing's for sure, the problems are too big, complex, and urgent to tackle alone. The only way we'll solve them for good is to work together, with philanthropists and organizations joining forces and resources to make the biggest possible difference to people and the planet. It's called collective philanthropy. Clients, partners, and UBS are working together through collective philanthropy programs to ensure children grow up in loving families, not orphanages, and improve the health and education of disadvantaged children, create climate-resilient livelihoods. There's more. Donations and results-based investments like development impact bonds and donor-advised funds are coming together to make more powerful pots of money with the strength to make a massive impact on global challenges. Solving these challenges is important to us, our clients, and the planet. And it's why UBS Philanthropy Services and our grant-making UBS Optimus Foundation are reimagining the power of connecting people with the expertise, tools, and financial resources needed to create a better world. Just imagine what we could do together.
Oh, this really feels great today. Thank you, Dylan. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great honor to be here today and be part of this inaugural Philanthropy Asia Summit. And thank you very much, Temasek Foundation, for organizing this event. We at UBS are very proud to be your partners on this summit. Now, at UBS, our purpose is to reimagine the power of investing and to connect people for a better world. With our UBS Foundation and the 3 UBS philanthropy collectives, we aim to connect, to mobilize, and to channel capital towards the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and, of course, the orderly transition to a lower carbon economy. We at UBS set ourselves a very, very ambitious target. We want to raise 1 billion in donations, and we want to reach 25 million beneficiaries through community investment and philanthropy by 2025. Now, the UBS Climate Collective will develop strategies that, first, mitigate the effects of climate change, sequester carbon emissions, and improve biodiversity here in Southeast Asia. Now, the natural assets which stand out in this context, and we would like to focus on today, is the natural carbon sequestration powerhouse, the mangroves. And with the support of Temasek Foundation and other partners, we are excited and very proud to launch the Mangrove M40 Initiative. This initiative is an action alliance which will design nature-based resilience projects to positively impact mangrove conservation, but also restoration in 40 global locations. And our goal is to develop a global investment pipeline for the M40 Fund with revenue streams, including the blue carbon projects for trading carbon offsets. Now, to kickstart this initiative, I'm very proud to communicate 2 commitments from UBS. First, a 2 million joint donation by UBS, Optimus Foundation, and UBS Singapore to kickstart this M40 initiative, to line up all the projects. And furthermore, UBS will co-invest an additional 10% as a matching contribution to any donors who join us in this exciting initiative. We at UBS clearly think that only by working together, we can achieve a real impact on a truly global scale. Now, thank you very much for that. Now we are super pleased to have Alejandro Litovsky with us. He's founder and CEO of Earth Security, and he will tell us more about the M40 initiative and why you all should join us on this journey. Alejandro, stage is yours.
Thank you, August. Thank you all, Temasek and hosts. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. But let me start by saying that climate change is here. And what you see on this slide is the average temperatures from 1850 until today. And we know that already tens of millions of people are experiencing the impacts of more intense storms and floods. And just days ago, the result of COP26 in Glasgow, as the UN brought countries together to drive joint action, just did not deliver the money that is needed to drive adaptation at scale. And to be quite frank, the struggle to get wealthy countries to pay for adaptation on poorer ones is going to continue, and is not necessarily going to go well. So what do? A huge part of the solution to climate adaptation lies in nature, but we have not been looking. So I want to talk today about one particular ecosystem that could be Asia's secret weapon when it comes to climate action, and that is mangroves. And let me show you what mangroves can do. Let me pull up a little video, 10 seconds. So we're seeing a simulation of storm waves. And you see the mangroves protecting a coast, absorbing the energy of that wave. And look at the water that comes through, hitting the coast. Almost no impact. It's incredible. And that's the way nature works. And that's why we call mangroves, amongst other ecosystems, a powerful nature-based solution. Now, they can reduce the impact of a tidal wave by 70%. They've been proven in the Philippines to be 50 times more cost-effective than building a cement seawall. And just imagine, as we try to protect ourselves from climate change, we're building cement seawalls that are incredibly carbon-intensive and also expensive to maintain. Well, the mangroves are there, and they just continue to grow while they're sequestering carbon. They're carbon-negative infrastructures. And finally, already now they're saving $65 billion a year on average by the avoided losses from storms and floods. And this is quite spectacular. Yeah. However, we are losing mangroves at an incredible rate. You can see in this picture fish ponds, aquaculture, the main driver of mangrove deforestation in Asia. And half of the mangroves in the world are gone. And they're going very fast. In fact, the rate of deforestation of mangroves is the highest rate of deforestation than any type of forest in the world. And so what this shows is that we can't just go on and plant the mangroves. We have to address the underlying economic pressures that are driving deforestation in the first place. Now, all around the world, in particular in Asia, there are a lot of efforts by local communities, by NGOs and others that are trying to replant the mangroves, to restore. But these communities and these NGOs and others, they need help. And they need investment, because unless these projects can generate the jobs and generate the returns and create alternatives to these locations, these mangroves are not going to remain. These projects have shown the power of mangroves as an asset to double the income of local communities. Why? Because they're acting as a natural nursery grounds for shrimp and crabs and fish that these communities depend on. In fact, almost 70% of all the commercial fish species in Asia depend and come back to mangroves in some shape or form. Even tuna that then go out into the high seas and are fished. So, pretty powerful nursery grounds that is nurturing communities and incomes. But also, mangroves are a carbon powerhouse because they're sequestering carbon 4 times faster than tropical land-based forests in their roots into the soil under the water. And that's why it's called blue carbon. And it's been shown, thirdly, that companies such as this one in Pakistan we've worked with in the past, power infrastructure companies putting 25 turbines on a floodable mudplain of Karachi, planted mangroves and have seen the protection that those mangroves afford to that infrastructure. It's going to save this company $7 million over 25 years in avoided maintenance cost. And by the way, they've doubled the incomes of the communities that are living in absolute poverty on site and are now not only able to maintain themselves, they're actually exporting shrimps, very particular type of shrimp that grows there, to Japan. It's incredible. 20 times the return on investment for this company in investing in mangrove restoration. Yeah. They're putting the mangroves on the balance sheet. And this is the most important change that we need to work together to create. So, if these mangroves are so valuable, then how do we drive investment on a global scale? How do we bring the banks and the companies and the governments to invest in this asset globally? Now, we did the research and we found that all of the mangroves on Earth are mostly found in 25 countries in the world. As you can see there in red, half of them are in Asia. These mangroves are storing 2.7 billion tons of carbon with an enormous restorable potential. And actually, just 40 locations around the world, 40 hotspots, are concentrating the majority of these mangroves. So we've called this the Mangrove 40 because there's enormous potential for us to go out there into these locations and try to understand how do we build an investment pipeline that can look at mangroves as an asset on a global scale and can drive the alternative way of driving economic growth in a way that is resilient, in a way that prepares to deal with these big impacts of climate change, but is also creating economic alternatives for communities, for companies, and for these countries. And bang in the middle of the Asia part of the M40 is Singapore. And that's why I'm quite excited to be here today with Temasek, with UBS, with all of you, because Singapore has amazing resources. It has the knowledge and the science. It has a financial system that is already trying to gear to invest in nature as a source of carbon. But it's also the hub of the maritime sector and a range of other industries that are incredibly well placed to start to invest in this new blue economy. We just haven't yet found a way how to do it. What are the types of projects? We could be investing in coastal green infrastructure, replace or complement gray with green. We could be driving sustainable fish farming because those business models exist where we can replace these massive expanses of fish ponds to help shrimps grow in balance with mangroves. There's less water pollution and a range of other benefits and more productivity. In fact, it's been calculated in Southeast Asia, fish farming could be making another $8,000 per hectare per year when you combine the benefits of less water pollution, of more productivity, and of premiums, and the carbon offsets that could come on top. Ecotourism, we have plenty of examples, not least here in Singapore. And of course, blue carbon finance, as a cherry that comes on top, because we can still generate that economic value on the ground while generating that carbon finance in addition. But what are the barriers? The barriers are enormous. We have an old development mindset that thinks it's just okay to just clear these mangroves, get them off the way, to build development, to build hotels, to build real estate, to build fish ponds. We need to change that, and that is a mindset. We need buy-in from local governments. We need communities to increase their capacity. And finally, we need that access to the market. We need access to resources. And that's why we see such a need to create a coordinating catalyst initiative that brings us all together on the grid, on that scaffolding that is the hotspots that we know where they are, to explore how do we turn that value, that economic value that exists, into an investable asset that allows companies, investors, and governments to put those mangroves on their balance sheets. And so we want to do three things. We want to be able to map those economic models onto each of these regions to understand what are those economic growth blueprints that can help each of these regions to develop in a way that is aligned with nature, drive economic growth in partnership with nature. Try to build those investment ecosystems, as we were hearing before, investors and companies and governments and communities and NGOs and foundations coming together in each of these places to support those pathways, to support those projects, to drive capital, to drive economic growth. We need investment ecosystems, not just alliances and collaboration. And finally, coming out of all of that, let us identify what is the pipeline for investment that can emerge at scale, that can then allow us to mobilize real money that goes into real assets that can develop in a very different way. So this is your turn, for all of us together to collaborate in building a transition. It's not just about preserving nature, it's about developing economically in a way that is done in partnership with species and ecosystems. So thank you very much. Delighted to be here and hope to continue the conversations.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. So as a banker, I really like the fact that we finally have a new asset class, and that's the mangroves. So let's look into that. I also like the fact that we can do something out of Singapore, and we will and want to work together with Alejandro and team to also find solutions from our banking perspective to really run these projects. And of course, the fact that most of the mangroves are here in Southeast Asia makes this project even more compelling. So thank you very much, Alejandro. So if you don't mind, we would ask some questions. If please you would like to submit your questions, please feel free. I will start off with some own questions, if you don't mind. So Alejandro, what would you envision the global impact of this M40 initiative to be?
Well, look, to start with, the mangroves that we have are going very fast. There's 2.7 billion tons of carbon equivalent stored in mangroves today, and our first job is to make sure we don't lose that and we stop emitting from mangrove deforestation. So avoiding deforestation is the first. The second is there's another 1 million hectares that can be restored and driven as a carbon opportunity. There's millions of communities, and then there's the opportunity to put nature on the balance sheet.
Now thank you. You touched on a few projects. Can you elaborate a little bit more which kind of projects will be in your pipeline going forward?
Well, look, we talk a lot about blue carbon, and rightly so. We face an enormous challenge to decarbonize. But blue carbon alone will not make it, and blue carbon will always be something that can be added to local economic projects that develop with mangroves. And I think I see an enormous opportunity in aquaculture. This is already a $45 billion industry that is growing, the biggest growth of protein source for a growing population. We need to find a way to develop this industry in a way that is sustainable. Sustainable certification of shrimps exists, but who has heard of it, right? We need to get to the point where you're sitting in a Michelin-star restaurant and the waiter comes and says, here's your mangrove shrimp. It is sustainably sourced, and you can feel we have done that. So I think, fish farming is a huge area of growth. We need to make sure that that grows sustainably, and we need to reorient the industry. This can be done with mangroves. So there's a huge opportunity there to look at.
Thank you, Alejandro. So one question from Singh Narendrajit. How can individual investors help?
Well, look, I see a very big role for investors and for companies, in two ways. Firstly, I've shown you an example of an actual investment, which is not a mangrove investment. It's a coastal infrastructure investment. And so there's a very important need for you to take part in this initiative and help drive the analysis and the research on how do we structure these business models so that you can then apply it to your portfolio. So investors and companies have a huge role to play, not just in supporting this and being part of it, but taking away some of these lessons learned, looking at their existing portfolios and asking, how can my investments in key sectors that are on the coast or in the ocean be drivers of this agenda? So it's not just about the funding, it's also about the action, and it's also about the change that you can drive in your mainstream economic activity.
And now another question, anonymous question. So who will be the main partner or stakeholder implementing this project?
Look, you need to think about this in two levels. On the ground, we already have the NGOs and the communities that are driving hundreds of mangrove restoration projects. Those exist, but they're working against the current. And what they need is the business case, and they need the investors and the companies to believe in those and partner to drive more economic-driven investments into nature. So the implementation of what mangrove restoration and conservation looks like still needs to happen at the local level. But we need to fix that gap. We need to fix that broken system of how companies, investors, and governments start to see the potential of these opportunities. And the role of the M40 is not to go and plant the mangroves, is to be able to coordinate all those actors that are doing a phenomenal job on the ground with a range of other investors that have the capital so that we can visualize and materialize a global pipeline that is able to then move capital at scale.
A question on carbon and mangroves, also anonymous. Do mangroves sequester carbon continuously every year? Does removing more carbon from the earth each and every year, or merely just store it? Basically, how much carbon equivalent do they remove every year?
Look, this is a really important question, whoever asked that. I think the important thing to know is that all that carbon that is stored in mangroves today, which is a lot, cannot be traded because it's already there, right? The carbon that we can trade as blue carbon is from those mangroves that can be restored and replanted because the mangroves will then store it as they grow. And every 4 or 5 years, they will issue credits and it will work in the way the credit market works. Now, it's very important that we focus not just on that restoration, and that's why I'm talking about carbon. We need to have a responsible approach to carbon sequestration, which is A, knowing that it's not just about having carbon projects, it's about having local green economic development projects that will also generate carbon. And secondly, that is very important to preserve the mangroves that we have and not create the incentives that we can go off and clear all the mangroves and plant them again so that then we can trade the credits, right? And so, it's very important to understand that we need to engage with the carbon removal that will come from new mangroves. But those new mangroves have to have a local economic value and really give back to communities to ensure that those mangroves will stay standing. And at the same time, protect all the other mangroves that exist, which have all these other values I've talked about, like coastal protection, asset protection. You can literally put these mangroves on your balance sheet, right? And that's not so much about carbon, but it's about other kinds of economic roles this asset plays, and we need to think about both. And this is why it's very important for us to have an integrated initiative that is generating the knowledge, translating the knowledge from science. I was just talking to someone from NUS there, an amazing center for nature-based solutions, great science being developed. We need to translate the science in a way that can be implemented. And that's the role that we need to play, but important to have a responsible approach to carbon. And this agenda, of course, will grow very quickly, will be very dynamic. A lot of people are opposing carbon offsets for right reasons as well. So it's important to be very, very sort of strategic and smart about how we approach that so that we think about value creation at large.
Okay, thank you, Alejandro. So I think we met some people when you arrived on Friday, and it is interesting to see that there are lots of mangrove projects already going on in this region. So Vincent, for example, actually here, Vincent Shen asked the question, we have significant mangroves also in Taipei, right? How can we work together, and how is the carbon credit calculated? This is also an interesting question.
Well, let me say that, as many of you may know, blue carbon has an enormous potential. And the world is now turning to blue carbon and discovering, let's say, this source of carbon sequestration at scale. But there's only 1 or 2 projects of blue carbon that have been literally certified and issued credits. And part of the challenge, and what we need to collectively find out as well, is how to ensure that this market can scale and can scale quickly. And I would say that the market itself is full of bottlenecks. It is complicated, it's costly to audit, it needs boots on the ground, it needs time, it's not done on a continuous basis. And so in many ways, I also think that this market that is growing, that is nascent, is also ripe for disruption. And there's a question about how we use technology, how we use tech solutions, how we rethink the value chain of carbon sequestration when it comes to blue carbon, so that we can address some of those big bottlenecks, lower the costs, and make it a bit more attractive and easier for projects, real estate, landowners, and a range of others to engage in these activities, let's say, with a greater comfort level.
Now, I think we will take the last question now, right, if you don't mind. And this is a very interesting question, so because it's important. What is needed for governments in Southeast Asia to work towards an improved enabling environment for blue carbon? What is needed?
Look,
what do we expect from governments in
this is a great question, and we've been working in the Philippines for the last few years with a range of mayors in coastal municipalities that are quite vulnerable and they don't have the resources. And by the way, they now have to be responding to COVID. They have less resources, they have less attention. And what we've seen is how powerful it is when you get mayors, local agencies, or regional agencies to start to think about what can we do to create that enabling environment. And there's a range of things that can be done. And one has to do with zoning and thinking about coastal lands and what are the permits and what are the regulations that can enable that to protect those mangroves. And the use of public lands is a very, very big deal. The ability of governments to co-invest, to provide blended finance that de-risks private capital is another massive opportunity. But overall, I would say, as I said in the presentation, it's also about that change of mindset from an old way of driving industrial development and an old way of driving an economy that sees nature as a liability, just something that needs to be getting out of the way, to build those factories, to build it gray. And we need to help governments and local governments in particular to start to see green as an opportunity for prosperity. And I love the eco-prosperity concept that has taken hold here in Singapore, driven by Temasek. I think that encapsulates it so well. And that is very relevant in this case as well. So, mayors need to be part of that wave of green industrialization. And these mangroves and other ecosystems, including coral reefs, seagrass, and so on, play such a vital role in becoming assets of this new economy.
So Alejandro, now your elevator pitch, call for action.
Well, we know these ecosystems have value. Mangroves are an incredible powerhouse of biodiversity, carbon, and asset protection, and all of these things have economic value. We now need to find a way to work together and pull the best minds from investment, government, companies, NGOs, and communities to work out a way to build a global pipeline that mobilizes finance to these natural assets in a new way. And I hope some of you will join us and we can continue to work together in this journey that is starting. So thank you, August.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alejandro.